Okay, so I'm going to put together some instructions on soldering. The first thing I want to talk about though is safety when you're using soldering equipment. So I'm going to show you two soldering irons. Okay, hold them right next to each other. Okay, and just looking at these, which one of them is on and which one of them isn't, do you think? Alright, let's go ahead and see. I'm going to hold them down onto this piece of cardboard. Alright, so this one you can see is actually burning it a little bit. You can see the burns on the cardboard from this hot soldering iron. This one not doing anything because it's off. Okay, so my point there is that these things get really hot, and in order to protect yourself, just be very careful. You don't know if it's off or not. This one turned off, not even plugged in, but it looked exactly the same as that one. Also, just as you're moving around, so here you can see this one actually started to melt through the cable when it touched the cable while it was on. Again, just be careful about keeping the cable clear while you work. And when you solder, I'll go ahead and melt some solder here for you. You can see that there's fumes put off. I don't know if you can tell anything off the fan. So as you solder, hopefully you can see fumes coming off of this. Okay, and these fumes are toxic. Okay, it's important not to breathe them in. So you want to use some kind of something to keep the air flowing. So I've got, if you can see it, a fan right there, and then if you look over here, I've got the door opened. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. The door open to the outside, so I got air flowing through the room. Okay, and then additional things to be careful about when you melt the solder. It has a tendency to splatter, and so again, to protect yourself, you're going to want to wear some eye protection. If a little piece splatters on you, should be fine, but just be careful. Sometimes the iron gets hot, so if it shouldn't be hot enough to burn you, but if it feels like it's getting too hot, go ahead and set it back down and unplug it. And then this solder here that we're using is lead-free solder, but you never know. And lead is toxic, but it's generally pretty safe to use as long as when you're done with it you wash your hands and you're not putting your hands in your mouth as you work. Okay, so now let's get into some soldering basics. So when you solder, you're going to have a stand. So here's the soldering stand, and they'll have a spot for like a wet sponge here. And when you solder, the first step is to clean off the iron, and we can use the sponge here to clean it. Or even better, if you have one of these, you can use this brass sponge and just kind of poke it in there to clean it off. Okay? And it gets the tip nice and clean. Once you've done that, you're going to take the object you're soldering. Okay? And you're going to, so I'm going to be soldering this item right here. You're going to take the tip of the soldering iron and apply it to the place where you're making the connection. Okay, and you're going to hold it there to heat up the area. Okay, after you've held it there for probably about 10, 15, 20 seconds, you're going to come in with the solder and apply it at the base of the iron so that it melts. And now, generally, you're going to want to use some type of tool to hold it in place. Okay, and then you hold it here. It's going to melt the solder. When you're done, you're going to remove the solder and then remove the iron. Okay. Before we return the iron to the stand, we're going to melt some solder onto the tip. What this does is it keeps it clean and it keeps it from oxidizing. Okay, these get hot, they oxidize, so whenever we're not using it, we put solder on the tip and it keeps it clean. Okay. Now if you look here, this is the connection I just made. Okay. Right there, it's actually a pretty bad one. It's hard to tell on this video. But the reason it was bad is because I didn't have something holding this in place. Okay, generally it's good to anchor this in place as you work. So before we finish this, I'm just going to go through the steps again. You remove the soldering iron, you clean it, okay, you hold it in place where you want to solder, hold it for about 20 seconds, bring in the solder, okay, melt the solder at the place, and then when you're done, you remove the iron, remove the solder, remove the iron, coat solder onto the iron here, and then you place it back in the stand. Okay. A couple other things to think about when you're soldering, you actually want to take the iron and you want to apply pressure here to hold it in place. So it's important to have that stand so you can get the pressure here. I don't know if you can see, but I'm pushing down on this board a little bit to keep it in place. These irons themselves shouldn't get too hot, but if you hold something there for too long, it can start to burn the parts of the circuit. It shouldn't be an issue here. Okay, and then if you look at this board here, you can see little railings. And so if you're soldering on an area, you're going to put copper in that, or you're going to put the solder in that area. You don't want it to spread over to the other areas though. Okay, which that's going to do something that will short out your circuit and prevent it from functioning the way it was intended. Okay, and so important to keep the solder in the area you're soldering at. And these are pretty much the basics of soldering. From here, you can do lots and lots of things. If you do end up getting solder where it shouldn't be, you can clean it, and we have tools to do so if it's necessary. Okay.